Under the war, as said, talk of many things, but from a localist perspective today, a very warm welcome to our long-awaited webinar. I'm Jonathan Wareham, the Chief Executive of Localis, independent think tank of the place. We are all gathered here today to debate a new publication from a new series, Other Ideas, which Localis are launching, and with great pleasure to introduce Emeritus Professors Colin, Copus and Steve Leach. The subject of our essay, we sent a link to everyone who's joining today, so you've got a chance to read it or send it again, is Reorganisation, Local Government and the Future of English Devolution. There has been no let-up of debate, controversy and discussion since the English Devolution white paper was published towards the tail end of December last year before Christmas. And in this short and acute paper from Colin and Steve, they raised some issues which they've identified, which we think, even if this is a rage against the dying of the light, are worthy of embers to get some sparks to fly upwards for us to debate. Thinking about some of the constitutional issues for local government, the justification for LGR, how it connects with devolution, is it consistent that in its impact? What does it mean in terms of England as a part of Europe, in terms of how does this relate to size, composition compared to our European brethren? And in terms of local central relations, in terms of Whitehall's long-term and long agenda, what was the genesis for this? And given where we are, what might this mean for a future state of English local government? And what can we gainfully learn from this process? So the rules of the game are, we are going to, Steve and Colin are going to talk this through, but we have a brilliant panel of external speakers who I'm going to invite to share their views after Steve and Colin have had their time. Time is a wasting. We've only got an hour, so keep it very short and punchy so we can continue the debate. And for our participants today, throw it into the Q&A. So just to go through today's speakers, after I introduce Colin and Copus and Steve Leach, we have Dr. Tom Oliver, Senior Lecturer in Politics, University of the West of England, and Jack Shaw, Policy Fellow from the Productivity Institute. We've got some great local leaders in Councillor Bridget Smith, leader of South Cambridgeshire District Council, and declaring interest, a Localis board member, and fresh from Oslo, Councillor Marianne Overton, chair of the Local Government Association's independent group. So that's the rules. I'm going to invite Colin and Steve to briefly tell us why you wrote this, what we should learn from this before I open it out to our fellow panelists. Take it away, fellas.
Steve? Did you want to kick off, Steve?
Colin, speak. Steve, you're muted. Colin, can I ask you to fill the gap?
Yeah, I can do. I think the reason we put this together, Steve and I want to thank Localis for picking up the cudgel, so to speak, and putting all the work and effort into publishing this for us, and we're extremely grateful for that. So thank you to Jonathan and the crew at Localis. I think the issue for us is that our centre, and I'm reluctant to use the word government because governments come and go, the centre stays as it is, and it is always a surprise to me how very quickly new ministers who in their entire political careers may never have made any comment about local government, what reorganisation whatsoever at any point, within 10 minutes of taking office are convinced almost overnight that the problem that ails local government in England is it's too small and we need it to be unitarised and increased into bigger and bigger units, often based on spurious or very narrow evidence-based, cherry-picked from particular sources. So I think since 1972, that was unfinished business for our centre. They didn't get the 58 unitary councils they wanted across the whole of England, which today would give us average populations of about 900,000, not far shy of the 500,000, 500,000 the government were talking about. But every opportunity that has come along since, particularly as new ministers have arrived, the government has suggested that we need to increase the size of local government. It's like a one-trick pony. Rather than looking at all of the other issues that concern local government, rather than looking at what might be real devolution, size seems to be the only thing we latch onto. There are almost 88,500 municipalities and councils across the whole of the EU, 88,500. We have 317 of them. We're soon going to have fewer. And my prediction, and I think Steve would go along with this, is that when we do create these newer councils, in a few years' time, somebody will come along and go, you know what, the trouble is our local government isn't big enough. We need to increase its size. And that journey will just continue and continue until we hit this magic number of 58. So I think that the real issue for me is look at what makes other systems work. Come off of this path-dependent journey of bigger is always better, because there are stacks of evidence that proves that that isn't always categorically the case when it comes to local government. And if we're really serious about devolution, well, I'm going to just finish this sort of opening set of remarks on this. The only ever statement that's been really made, and powerfully so, and we put it in this report, about the constitutional status of local government is that it doesn't have the right to exist. And that was said in 1986 in the Whittam Committee. Local government in England does not have the right to exist. How can you devolve to something that doesn't have the right to exist? The first thing any government serious about devolution would do, it would be to give local government a constitutionally protected right to exist. Of course, if it did that, it then wouldn't be able to fiddle with the size of it to suit its own agenda. I think that's the problem that we have as well, is that local government size is seen to be something that helps the centre promote its policies and its own preferences, rather than being institutions of local self-government as it is viewed across most of the civilised world. And so I think that's where we need to be looking. And I would simply finish this opening statement by saying size is not the issue that will solve all of the hours of local government.
Many thanks, Colin. Steve, are you able to unmute thyself? Can you get any help?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, hooray! We can hear you loud and clear, Steve.
Good,
please,
right.
Take it
I'm
away.
now happy to do my bit. Right. Thank you for coming along to this invitation. It's only 6 months ago that the Labour government launched its white paper, in which there was no reference to local government reorganisation. It's fair to say. It's fair to say that Colin and I were both appalled by the totally inadequate quality of the white paper, and in particular the lack of substance in the arguments, the justifications, and everything that was involved in the white paper. We've set out our key concerns in the Localis paper, which is being discussed today. They were as valid then as they are today. But what I want to emphasise in my brief introduction is the changed political circumstances surrounding the progress of the white paper. So quite apart from the volatility and huge dangers apparent in the global political situation, we have the additional upheavals caused by the recent impact of the local government reorganisation proposals. First, we've got the substantial gains made by reform in the May elections, 7 new shire counties that they now control. I think they are unlikely to just sit back quietly and watch Kent and Lancashire, for example, chopped into pieces by local government reorganisation. I suspect they will have a very different agenda. Secondly, we've seen the virtual wipeout of Labour and Conservative councillors in the recent elections. Places that were once bastions of Conservative and Labour control, often with support for the large unitary authority, bigger is better agenda, they no longer exist. Thirdly, we've got the knowledge that further elections are scheduled for May of next year in the metropolitan districts, the London boroughs, most shire districts, unless of course they're cancelled again by Angela Rayner, and in some unitary authorities. Unless the political landscape changes significantly over this period, we can expect, I think, further substantial gains from Reform, Liberal Democrats, the Greens and the Independents, and there are bound to be major changes of attitude to local government reorganisation in these areas and by these parties. Fourthly, we've got the perilous condition of the world of local government following the recent budget statement by Rachel Reeves. There's the wide-ranging impending bankruptcy forecast, though not by Rachel Reeves herself, of local authorities across England. There'll be no new financial resources available or earmarked for already cash-strapped councils in England. There's no devolution on offer, as Colin mentioned. There's an ambitious Labour programme of house building, social care, education, anything you can name, within 18 months of which local government reorganisation upheaval will be launched and dumped, we could say. There are major incompatibilities between the current local government resource famine, Labour's ambitious policy agenda, in which local authorities are expected to be major players, and the impending local government reorganisation upheaval. Now, in these circumstances, to quickly conclude, how can this pointless local government reorganisation and the upheaval involved, which the Labour government continues to support, how can it possibly be sustained and justified? And what's the point of all this? Our conclusion by Colin and I, based on a wealth of evidence, which is in the Localis report, is that the programme should be scrapped. That we're currently talking about the reversal of the Titanics on the deck chairs on the Titanic argument. That seems to me to be the metaphor that best captures what's going on at the moment. I think there's an opportunity in the local government LGA conference next week for these concerns to be highlighted and voiced at the conference, hopefully with a growing spread of resistance to the government's unsustainable local government reorganisation agenda, to remind ourselves of the catchphrase of the 1970s, which is as relevant today as it was then: don't vote for RE Moat. Thank you.
Colin, Steve, well, we definitely did get it both barrels. Many thanks indeed, gentlemen. In terms of spotlight, we're going to run it alphabetical. So can I please invite Dr. Tom Oliver to give your response to what Colin and Steve have written, please.
Thanks, Jonathan. Thanks, Colin and Steve, for the report, and Localis for the invitation. I suppose I want to bring a bit of a perspective to this that's grounded in the West Country where I am, where I co-lead the Bristol Civic Leadership Project, and from growing up in Somerset, where we've seen recent reforms have brought kind of first-hand visibility and experience of both, I suppose, opportunity and disruption. So in Somerset, as with many parts of England, we've seen this shift to unitaries, which raises significant questions. Whilst it may offer potential efficiencies, we've seen really, really quickly how some of those established democratic relationships have been disrupted. So places like South Somerset and Mendip, which have developed very strong local ties with residents and have very distinctive approaches to service delivery and working cross borders, much of that cross-boundary collaboration and learning risks being lost to a governance model which itself is broader in scale, but I think thinner in local texture, we might say. We've also seen with the statement yesterday similar tensions in Bristol. The city itself has voted to move away from the mayoral model and adopt the committee system, which we're experiencing at the moment. A choice made explicitly by Bristol's residents to prioritise more participatory, more consensus-led governance. Yet with this announcement and some of the reforms coming through, Bristol will now shift again, this time back to the leader and cabinet model, raising kind of that broad concern whether local government's arrangements can genuinely reflect local democratic preferences in the future. So I think overall the English Devolution white paper offers the language of empowerment, but obviously the mechanisms lean heavily on top-down reorganisation. There are obviously questions which Colin and Steve very soundly raise about the evidence base for the 500,000 magical number for population, But the significant thing here for me is the risk of weakening the connection between local institutions and place and the communities they serve. And the final point, I think, for me would be the concern about representation and advocacy for the role of councillors as well. With councillors being expected to serve significantly larger areas with fewer colleagues, that's obviously going to reduce to a huge level effective scrutiny and engagement, and we also risk kind of that level of innovation and closeness to the population that the councillors serve. So I'll wrap it up there, but thank you.
Tom, many thanks for your succinct and powerful thoughts and comments. Let's go to Oslo, to Marianne. Can you give a European perspective on some of this, please?
Hello. I'm probably not able to give the whole European perspective, I must say, but nevertheless, I think the important point that I know is that our councils in the UK, of course, as everybody knows, we're already probably the most centralised in Europe and getting more so. And when you look at the other councils, when I speak on behalf of the councils for European municipalities, which I do, that body is representing 1 million councillors. And it's something like, I forgot the numbers now, but a very, very large number of councils, because many of their councils are much smaller and they have more powers. So they're more able to, they control their own water, for example, and we were doing water resilience today, and I did explain to the European body there, including the Commissioner, incidentally, the dangers of having all of that handed over to a privatisation, which in our case appears to have meant a very unpopular decisions with high amounts of money paid to top people in the organisation, while the pollution continues to run into the rivers. So I think, lack of investment on infrastructure. So I think these are the kinds of things you can get if you allow others, other than local councillors, to control your patch. And this is the problem. So the whole of all of what we see now appears to me, and I'm picking up on the point made by a previous speaker, which I agree with, about making it so that if councillors have larger and larger areas, the connections are reduced, the powers that the council have, even when they do work together, are reduced. And it does mean that somebody voting will start to wonder what they're voting for, because their councillor doesn't seem to be able to do anything. And therefore we start to reduce the amount of turnout, reduce the amount of support, and indeed, obviously that's a serious undermining of local democracy, and you get to go much more towards a centralisation politically. And that for me is a big problem. I'm in Lincolnshire. We've just got a new mayor in May. And she said that she would not move into the area until she won, if she won. So we've got somebody, and of course, UK reform. So it's not because of any local connections. It's not because of local abilities. It's not because of any of the things you would hope, strong leadership. It's because of being the party, because of the party machinery and being in the party that's got a popular mayor at the time, a popular leader at the time. So I think it's really vital then that we, excuse me, I'm just getting distracted. I think it's really vital that we do keep our local connections, and that is what makes a difference. I'm not sure that this government properly understood that when they do move to bigger and bigger areas, they were thinking that that would mean the Labour Party, they can use their party machinery and they're off and they're going to take much more control. I'm not sure they'd properly seen that there was another party doing exactly that, and perhaps being a bit more cute on the social media, which has meant that, the ship has gone in a completely different direction, and it looks like it will continue to as well through the next elections, which will damage the Labour Party considerably. So if I were them, I would really think seriously about changing, or at least veering off some of those big policies, this being one of them. And of course, for me, the other one is the planning. They're trying to take control of it. Well, it looks, I better be clear with my language. it looks as if there is a significantly more powers, more centralisation of the planning as well, and that for us will be a real worry, because big government can ignore a section of the community and still get elected, whereas I was very interesting. We had a talk from Greenland. They have 15,000 people there, and they have to do what their residents want. Nothing, she said, no development happens without local support. Can you imagine? So, that would be such a joy to have here, I thought. But this is the issue. If you get bigger and bigger, local voices have less power, and indeed local councillors start to be sidelined, and councils. So local democracy seriously undermined. And I want to thank the people who've written, thank Colin and Steve for writing that report, and Localis for their work on this. Absolutely vital. Good time. Let's see if we can veer. They won't change, but perhaps we can veer the policy off in a slightly different direction.
Thank you very much, Marianne. Well, next we're going to invite a very in-demand research and analyst, Jack Shaw, please, if you're going to have the spotlight on you. Jack, please, your thoughts and opinions.
Thanks very much, Jonathan, and good to hear the contributions so far. I'm going to make three quick points: purpose, size, and inevitability. So on purpose, if we step back from the English Devolution white paper for a moment, administrative reform, I think, often reflects the kind of different or emerging conceptualizations that places have, or at least centres have, about what local government exists for. And certainly in the 70s and 80s, if you asked councillors then, or you spoke to local authorities then, they would say, we principally exist for tackling poverty, anti-poverty in particular, thinking about the welfare state off the back of the Second World War. If you move to the 21st century, that's still true, I think, but I think most places now would say, words like place leadership or things like economic development or growth or prosperity. And that idea that kind of local authorities are vehicles for economic growth has been emerging over kind of time. So it's not surprising really to see the centre ask itself whether or not institutions are fit for purpose for delivering that kind of objective. The question, I think, for local government is, if it's not that, what does it stand for? And the risk is that we focus a lot on what local government isn't and not what it should or could be or is. The second point on size, the obviously kind of the vexed issue about the size of local authorities and whether or not we should look towards that 500 figure. The public policy discourse has kind of almost been pathologically obsessed with it so far. I mean, I agree with Colin and Stephen. I think the evidence for the exact figure is weak. Local authorities deliver about 800 services, some more, and so the idea that there is an optimal size it doesn't make sense. It will create, whatever size you pick, will create economies of scale and diseconomies of scale. So there is a positive story in that, but it's much more nuanced than is being presented. At the same time, the government has kind of said it will be flexible, so we'll have to see how that develops in practice. But I do agree that some idea of rationalisation, which includes making some authorities larger, is a sensible approach. And I think we're already seeing, and we have long seen, that being an emerging consensus in the sector. We see local authorities sharing chief execs. We see lots of authorities sharing services, particularly back office functions, communications, IT, legal services, and so on. In many respects, we see authorities operating across a number of boundaries when you look at specific policy domains. So if you look at fostering, for example, there aren't enough foster carers. Local authorities know this, and so they work together to see how they can find the foster carers they need. So there is some suggestion, and if I was to be a bit provocative, that kind of partial reorganisations have already kind of happened to some degree. I would just reflect, though, and I think what's really welcome in Stephen and Colin's work is that what we haven't had is a kind of dispassionate and rigorous analysis of the implications of local government reform. So this work is definitely welcome. And the final point I would make, and kind of one of the questions, Jonathan, you set speakers, was, is the local government reorganisation agenda and is devolution a kind of culmination or an inevitable culmination of a direction of travel that Whitehall has been interested in? And Colin suggested that was certainly the case on local government reorganisation earlier. I agree to an extent. I think, the Treasury has always been interested in local government reorganisation. They've always seen the merits of it. But I don't think it was inevitable. And I guess this is my kind of real provocation, which is I think the sector has failed to make the case for itself. It hasn't made the case for how it leads public service reform, for example. It absolutely should be leading it. And I don't think it's very clear what role it's going to be playing. And public opinion, I think, is also worth, and I'll just end on that point, considering. The public are very sceptical of public services. They think they're broken. They think councils are not working. Clearly, a key driver of that is underinvestment in councils over a long period of time, but that's not the only driver. And so I do think we need to ask questions like, how do we think the sector innovates? And well, you might not agree with local government reorganisation. That is at least one form of innovation that's on the table. Thank you.
Jack, many thanks for those very strong, powerful points. And the provocation too, which always welcome at our debates. I'm going to invite Bridget Smith, please. Last but not least, what's your take on all we've been discussing today?
So thank you, Jonathan, and thank you for a really brilliant paper. So I've been through a number of emotions regarding LGR since November, ranging between anger, denial and sadness, but actually I've now got to the point of acceptance, as one does with grief, and if we have to do this, I'm going to make sure that I do it really well. The reality is for us in South Cambridgeshire, and I should say we've already got devolution, we've already got a mayoral-led combined authority, which I'm on the board of. So the reality is in South Cambridgeshire, our geography means that we wrap the whole way around Cambridge City. So we would probably have considered unitarisation sooner rather than later. But for people like me who are really passionate about district councils, it's really, really sad to see their whole-scale annihilation. And I think our residents will miss them as much as I will. So despite Jim McMahon's palpable commitment to and belief in local government reorganisation, I share the paper's view that you have to question where this all came from in its absence in the manifesto. I think the paper's right that the civil services behind this, striving for nice, neat maps and uniformity. But the sad fact is, again, as the paper states, one size does not fit all when you're dealing with people and with places. And most frustratingly, this is form before function, something that we all know is a really bad idea. Local government reorganisation, before all the really critical stuff, including adult social care, children's services, SEND and the NHS, local government reorganisation will not solve any of those problems, and those are the problems that really matter to people. And also frustrating is that at a time when we have a government which is truly ambitious to increase growth and housing delivery, both of which are district core functions, we are massively distracted dealing with LGR. How on earth we keep this ship, on track, never mind deliver on government ambitions, I'm struggling to understand. And then to add to the sadness of this, and we've already heard in relation to the West Country, councils, district and county, which have always had really strong positive working relations, are now being pitted against each other in their fight to save something of their identity. And the resentment and hurt and damage will take years and years to recover because we're dealing with people and we're not just dealing with lines on maps. And what of the resultant democratic deficit? In my own combined authority, we currently have a board made up of one mayor, the leader of one county, the leader of a unitary, and the leaders of 5 districts. After LGR, it will be 2 leaders and 1 mayor. And no one can think that that is good democracy. And finally, come the next general election, I think that realisation will dawn that the strongest part of every party's activist base is all those local government councillors and their very personal local armies of door knockers and leaflet deliverers who step up every time it's time to vote to national government. And I think it's going to be a really nasty shock to some people when they're found to be missing in action. Thank you.
Bridget, thank you so much for rounding up our panelists, and all of them were excellent. Thank you so much, Colin, Steve, Tom, Marianne, Jack, and Bridget, and exactly half time too. So we now have 30 minutes for everyone taking part in the call to lob in their questions into the Q&A box for us to debate amongst ourselves. Until they do, obviously, Colin, Steve, point to you now. When is turning this into a press release? Obviously, the news angle for me was just the huge. It's not decimation; it's the opposite. You know, 9 out of every 10 councillors in shire areas you're calculating would be lost. But going back to those sort of Jack's points about inevitability, every time if I want us to be devil's advocate, every time the great English public have their chance to vote on representation, whether it's the infamous North East Assembly or elsewhere, they tend to vote against whether it's their self-interest or representation. How do you respond to that? Is this really that unpopular against the grain of English popular opinion in terms of?
Well, I mean, certainly appears to. There's been a number of referendums over the years, organised by the councils themselves, but also normally through the Electoral Reform Society. So they're pucker processes that would stand up to being observed. And in each and every one of those referendums, the majority of the public have voted to keep their expensive, inefficient, confusing two-tier system. They like the expensive, inefficient two-tier. I'm being sarcastic if you hadn't picked that up, by the way. But, people are voting to keep local government close to them whenever they've been given the opportunity. So my challenge to anybody pushing for unitarisation would be to say, let the public decide. Have your arguments with the voters, have your discussions, then put it to a local referendum and let people decide. Now, if folk then decide they want a huge unitary council, at least they would have had the choice to have a say in that. My guess is they won't. My guess is they will be much more inclined to want to keep local government as close to them as possible. But of course, we won't ask. And the reason we won't ask is because they'll give the wrong answer. Now, the British sort of political elite has fallen when it comes to getting referendums that don't give the right answer. So my sort of assessment is that there will be no referendums. They'll be criticised as being too expensive, too diversive. The public don't understand all the issues. Strange, none of these arguments ever come out when we have a general election or a local election, are they? It's too expensive. The voters aren't clever enough to choose their representatives. But when it comes to issues like local government, so that would be my challenge. Looking at the results of past local polls, the public have always rejected bigger local government. Let's put your arguments to the test locally. And if the electorate reject those proposals for bigger local government, think again. And Jack made some very interesting points about innovation and rationalising that doesn't involve reorganisation. Indeed, if you look across the rest of Europe, you see that cooperations between councils, intermunicipal cooperation, is an alternative to reorganisation. Councils simply have a much greater and more fluid way of operating and working together than we've structured in this country. So 2 challenges, I suppose: referendums, and if you want to really innovate, look at what happens elsewhere. Don't be frightened of what you might find.
Steve, any thoughts your side quickly?
Well, just add to what I think everything that Colin's mentioned, I'd agree with. Indeed, all the speakers we've heard from, it's music to my ears in many cases. I think the one thing I'd want to emphasise that hasn't been emphasised so far is the crucial importance of community identity in all this. This is something that's not been lost elsewhere in Europe or indeed within the United States. It just seems to me, and again, there's a lot of supportive evidence on this, that it is really important for individual local people that they know where they live, that they identify with it, that they support football teams, that they have some kind of meaning. And the implication of all the white paper proposals, as far as I can see, is that every single significant area based on a local community will disappear from Britain. And I'm thinking of places like Oxford, Cambridge, Norwich, Ipswich, all places with strong, place identity. They will all disappear. We'll no longer, we've lost Carlisle, we've lost Barrow, we've lost a lot of real places that have had a strong, vibrant tradition of community identity and community activity. And I think that is a major worry, or should be a major worry for all of us.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to put Hadley Wells West has put a question which really elaborates on what we're asking now. So I'll put it to the panel to come in on this, starting with Tom. Hadley makes the point, Tom, that are we putting too much emphasis on the public opinion, which is against larger forms of local government, when in general the public has quite a pragmatic view. They want to prioritise effective service delivery, what works, over most other factors, including democratic engagement and closeness to local institutions, as you were saying. How would you respond?
I think there's something there that a lot of these arguments can be around things around size and structure and lines on a map. But the big questions here are about autonomy and about choice, about independence. And I think the point made by Bridget about security and predictability. We're in a constant state of governance change in this country as somebody comes in and throws the things up in the air and we're going again. I think there's something here around, to come back to the point of councillors, and I will always kind of advocate for councillors, is as Jack kind of talked about, it does make sense in terms of the growth agenda, thinking about these kind of often what are called functional economic geographies. But I think there's a question of functional representative geographies. What is a reasonable scale for a councillor to represent in terms of constituents or local citizens in a way that makes that role doable, meaningful? And I think residents, citizens would begin to question that, councillors' capacity to do that at that larger scale. And it brings in questions like, what is the role of councillors? How much should they be paid if they are now having kind of wards that are double, triple, maybe even 4 times the size? So I think pragmatically, in terms of when people need to call upon a councillor, when they are looking to local government beyond like thinking about, are my bins being taken out, that functional representative relationship, is that going to work at scale? And I think that's where citizens might come to question, is democracy working as and when I need to call on it and I need it?
Many thanks, Tom. Marianne, you're next in turn. How would you characterise that pragmatic service delivery is what counts, up and beyond any considerations about democratic engagement?
I think when thinking of service delivery, there are savings that can be made by working together, and that's what we've done already, but without changing our identity. So in Lincolnshire, we've got joined up backroom services for legal services, revs and bends. We're working on the waste services. So a number of services that can, if they can be more efficiently combined in their service delivery, then we've done that. So we have made savings, but we have kept our identity, which means that the people in the street understand who to contact when something hasn't been done properly or they want it done better and they've got an idea how to do it. So, to keep that local identity, I agree, is really vital, and the savings can be made without disrupting the most important part, and that of democracy, which is the connection with residents. Can I pick up the point earlier about the whether people want a mayor or not? If I can I pick that up? If I just pick that up a little bit earlier. Certainly, when we did have a consultation of sorts here, and the council had really Herculean efforts. They really did everything they could. Had 22 public meetings, really leading questions, lots of literature, everything they could think of through at it, still got a really low turnout because people were just not interested. And then even when it was whether you want a mayor or not is down to question 7 after do you want motherhood and apple pie, you know, even so, the majority of people who voted on that question voted against. It did not vote for a mayor. So even with all that, so I think I know it's something like 0.18% of people voted for having a mayor, and we then got one. So I think, you know, there is a strong concern about people that it isn't going to be easy for them to influence a mayor, and they're not sure about how that can be done. And I think that's going back to the other point. And I mean, certainly the Lincolnshire mayor may well have been, I should say, she may well have been elected on all the good qualities, absolutely. But if it was because of her, or you know, for anybody, if it is because of their party political allegiance, if it was that, then who are they going to answer to first? Is it going to be the residents, or is it going to be the party? And I think that's where we have a problem with local democracy. And I think it's really important that we do have strong local representatives at all levels.
Many thanks, Mary. Jack, what's your take on what works over local democratic engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really worth kind of investigating or probing what we mean by some of these ideas. So when we talk about proximity, you know, the idea that a town hall, you know, might be further away, for example, is not always accurate. There are whole swathes of council services that are run by county councils that are much further than they would be if you reorganised and had a unitary model. You might actually see that some of those services are kind of closer in that respect. In terms of kind of some of the politics of this, to your question, I often think there is a kind of conflation of things like administrative boundaries and identity. You know, you can still have larger administrative boundaries and protect community identity, and maybe one of the proxies for that is looking at turnout and turnout changes over time, but more recently, you know, local government turnout is really low. Mayoral turnout is higher than local government turnout. There are lots of reasons why that might be the case. One theory might be that local authorities are not empowered enough to do things that really matter to people, or they can't change them as much as they would like, and so that's why turnout is low. But I think it's really difficult to draw kind of clear lines or kind of defined positions on some of these issues because they are really nuanced. Just the one final reflection on kind of place and identity. I'm here in Barking and Dagenham in East London, and when it reformed in 1965, there was a bit of a movement to say you've created all of these places government and you only want to call them one word. That was what they wanted to do. So in Barking and Dagenham, they only wanted to call it Barking, and in the end, the Dagenham side fought enough that Barking and Dagenham became a thing, the same as Kensington and Chelsea and Hammersmith and Fulham. And so things like names matter, but beyond that, actually, the idea that some of our communities have lost identity as a result of that, I think they would possibly challenge. So I'm just conscious that this idea of administrative boundaries and community identity is maybe a bit more tenuous than sometimes suggested.
Colin, you've got your hand up, come in.
It was just a very quick point. Jack should think himself lucky because the part of East London I come from, they made up a completely ridiculous new name that nobody's ever heard of before, Newham. So think yourself lucky, mate.
Excellent. Well, we've got a bit more than a quarter of an hour. Some questions about planning. I'll cut and shut them together. Ian Lings asked, the current planning system does not provide effective mechanisms for strategic planning across boundaries. Could we reintroduce strategic level of planning? That was taken away, and if so, at what level? And I'll cut and shut that with old friend Andrew Taylor's where's Andrew's point? How can we ensure that local plans and housing delivery still receive the focus in the transition? There's a lot of moving parts, aren't there? It's like the old Morecambe and Wise one about the notes are all right, but are they necessarily in the right order? How do we know? Is it possible for local government to keep the show on the road with this. Thoughts on strategic planning and local plans? Anyone come in from our panel, please? Bridget, your hand's up first, followed by Marianne.
Thank you. So the government's been quite clear that local plans have to continue. It's absolutely critical to delivering on their agenda. Hopefully, the planners we employ are doing planning. They're not doing LGR. So, I think we just have to be very, very determined that we do keep the show on the road and we do continue to deliver our local plans, because they are going to be absolutely, they are fundamental to the decision making about what these new boundaries are going to be. So I have a joint local plan with Cambridge City. We have a joint planning service. So actually that gives us very, very strong grounds for unitarisation of our geography, and because it keeps it simple, and it means that business really can just keep on rolling. So yes, it's a challenge, the whole organisation. I think the challenge comes to at sort of the highest levels, a sort of chief executive, chief operating officer level, that they suddenly find themselves torn every which way. But, we have a job to do, and we can't forget we've got a job to do. And planning is one of our, it's the jewel in our crown of our jobs.
Thanks, Bridget. Marianne, please.
Yes, thank you. I agree with that. We also have a joined up, that's one of the things we have joined up is our strategic planning. So we still have local planning. So if you want your, your garage turned into a room or into a small house in your garden or something, you do go to the district council, whereas the strategic plan makes sure that the government's proposals are carried out in terms of how many houses we build, and also a lot of the framework is in there underneath the national planning framework. We've got our own regional framework, and that's called the local plan for us. And so that is certainly again, there've been some efficiencies there, but we're still retaining our local right to respond to a planning application. But in terms of areas, and Jack was suggesting that they might be nearer. So if you've got a garage that you want to do something with and you put in an application, at the moment you go to a place which is probably maximum 15 miles from where you live to get that heard and to speak at the meeting. Whereas, if it does get overall the whole area, if we do go unitary, we're talking a much, much greater area. So it could be 2 for the whole of Greater Lincolnshire, which is currently three upper tier authorities. So I think, it cannot be nearer unless it just happens to be where you live. But overall, it's going to have to be further from people as a whole. And that can be a very long way if you're talking now 50 miles to go and speak for 3 minutes at the planning application. So I think, that is part of the problem. So keeping the local identity is important, and trying to keep decisions made as close as possible to local people to get the best decisions and the most efficient. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Jack, please, let's hear from you. Got your hand up, please.
Yeah, can I just make 2 quick points on planning? I mean, I don't think local government reform is the solution to planning. Planning as a kind of system is broken, isn't it? And so we should start there. Where I think it's going to be really beneficial, though, is the role of mayors and the development of spatial development strategies in particular. We haven't done strategic planning in this country for a while, so I think we need to move back into that position. Often a question is asked, I think, are councils more pro-development or less pro-development than a mayor? And I think what's quite interesting is reflecting on mayoral use of call-in powers, and we've seen that in London, where the mayor is willing to take some decisions that councils can't, and that's not because those councils don't want to take those decisions, but this is where I think proximity does matter when it comes to planning, because if you are a smaller council and you've got a challenge on a big estate, that's suddenly a kind of big political challenge that you've got to navigate. That same challenge at the London-wide level, the mayor of London is much easier to kind of take a view without getting caught up in some of the kind of politics of that. So I do think there is a kind of dividend there around planning.
Many thanks indeed. Question we got from Gareth War asking about really the hyper-local level about this. He asked to know what's the potential from what we're going through for empowering lower level town and community councils, which may have lost power under district councils. Is there something we can focus on here in terms of local democracy? Jack, straight out.
Yeah, sorry, back in.
Okay.
I think one of the positives to this is it forces you to reevaluate or reassess that question about the most local of levels and whether or not the centre is doing enough when it comes to that. I don't agree that having town parishes or parish councils across the whole of the country is a solution, but I do think that has been lost as part of this debate in kind of this government, but also the previous government. We've obviously seen this government mention some stuff about neighbourhood area committees, if I've got the name correct, recently. There are also some interesting tensions as well. So where local authorities have very particularly acute financial challenges, we saw this in Somerset. Parish and town councils were increasing their precept by enormous amounts. And so I think there's a particular question about whatever model you go for, how do you finance those institutions?
Great points, Jack. Many thanks. Bridget, you're back again, please.
So the government seems very committed to these area committees, but actually, if setting up these, they are a new burden. So somebody's got to finance them. Someone's got to sort out the governance. Someone's got to, manage the secretariat for it. So, and quite often they fall over after quite a short period of time, and they are unelected. So there are serious problems with that as a model. The advantage of town and parish councils, albeit that, most town and parish councillors are not elected, most of them are co-opted, at least there is a strong governance structure around them, and, they are audited. And so, if initially, it seemed as if they wanted us to be handing down all sorts of responsibilities to that level. Now, there is an issue that there's no scrutiny and overview of town and parish councils. So if one is handing down money to them to do things that, all they've got is their external internal audit to make sure that nothing goes wrong there. So, there's no quick win. There's no obvious answer to this. But I would far rather see more town and parish councils, because at least there's a structure and there are some checks and balances there, rather than lots of area committees, which actually probably will fall over in quite a short period of time when people lose interest in them.
Thank you, Bridget. Colin, and then Marianne, in that order. Thank you.
Yeah, I think unfortunately for parish and town councils, they often get overlooked in some of this debate, which I think is a great shame. And I would take a different approach to Jack. I think there is a need to parish the whole of this country. If you look at many countries across the EU and Europe and beyond, it's very, very unusual to find any settlement of 10 or 11,000 people or even less that doesn't have its own elected council and its own mayor in many cases. And I think that we sort of have this idea that in this country anyway, that every political institution that we elect locally has to be doing the same thing, has to have the same responsibilities. And in the parish world, of course, there are enormous differences between those parish councils or town councils that have £1 million plus budgets and those that have a part-time clerk and meet in a school somewhere because they have, and you can't expect those two institutions to do the same thing except to act as a voice for local communities and legitimise elected ones. And even if they're co-opted in some respects, that's still local people taking on board the right to have a say in their in their own areas. So I would advocate very much we need more parishes and we need a lot more attention at that level. It's very interesting in any discussion about local government reorganisation, the centre rarely says, oh, by the way, we should abolish parishes or we should reorganise and join parishes together in the same way that we're thinking about principal authorities. It's almost as though they're completely off the radar. And my guess would say, my view would be, stay off it. Stay off that radar and get on with what you're doing, because if the centre, realises you're there, you may not be there for much longer. I suppose the other point I would just very quickly make, area committee, it always amazes me. We want to create these larger and larger unitary councils, but don't worry, because we're going to have area committees. To which my first reaction is, so you're admitting you're too big then? Because if you need to break something down into smaller bits that you've just created, there's an implicit admission there that you've created something that you don't think can link to real communities of place. And the problem with area committees is who designs them, who decides on the area, and not just the resourcing side that Bridget suggested, but who designs the area and to whose convenience is that area created. So I think there's a lot of problems around that whole agenda that we need to think through.
Many thanks, Colin. Before I take us into the finishing post, Marianne, quick response for you on this.
Thank you. I support having a lot of parish councils. I sit on 15 that I attend. I'm not part of them. I attend 15 in my area. So they mostly meet once a month. So if I had a bigger area still, it would be, it would be near impossible. So I think very important. They can and they do a great deal, and they are largely unpaid. And perhaps that's why the government has allowed them to continue so far and not raise the argument. Also, how much power do they actually have? They have a lot, actually. If they want, they can raise money, really build big buildings, clean streets, do the works. But in fact, but not make the planning decisions. And that, I think, is the thing that the government wants to take hold of in order to increase growth at the expense of local areas. And that, I think, is the problem. If you're prepared to damage this local area this year because you'll still get elected on the whole, and then another area next year, that to me is really undermining of local democracy and will lead to very unhappy people who will vote the wrong way from your point of view, but also may well start much more unrest and lack of cohesion, which again creates even bigger problems. So we need to have a really good local democracy to keep a secure, stable community. Thank you. And successful community.
Success indeed. Well, I'm going to start winding this down, but I very much take Jack's point earlier. So I'm just trying to reflect on this from Colin and Steve's essay and their analysis and their long-term story about this process. I think the binding lesson is, perhaps the local government as a sector could have prepared better in terms of making its own story, its own local case for reform, rather than have it done unto them. That's the binding thing I'm taking from this. I'm going to give each of our panellists, we're going to wind this up at the end of the hour, but I don't want anyone to leave with any sort of esprit d'escalier, switch off the Teams link, go into your next wall-to-wall Teams meeting. I wish I could have said that. And open this up to our panellists, Jack, Bridget, Tom, Marianne, Colin, Steve. Any final quick bullet point thoughts you have on the process, how we got there, and any hopes for the short hopes for the future before I wrap up at 12? Bridget, you're first off the mark.
Thank you. So very briefly, I think as well as taking the local out of local government, this is taking the local out of local councillor. And I think that's really sad. And I think that's what will really matter to people. So I'm sitting in my village here of 5,000 people. People knock on my door, they speak to me in the co-op, they speak to me in the pub, going to the gym is just like running a surgery, but I'm fine with that because it's my job, and I am I'm a proper local councillor, and I'm available 24/7 to people who are really struggling, and that will be lost. And I think people, I think that's what people will miss. And I think the reality is most people don't really care about this because they don't understand it. Only people like us care about it. And I think by the time they wake wake up to the reality of it, it'll all be too late. So I think it is incumbent on us to take as much control as we possibly can. And this is what I've been saying the whole way through. Take control. Don't rely on the Boundary Commission to do stuff. Start setting your own numbers. Start talking about single member wards if that's what you think is the right thing. And try and, picking up on what Colin said, take control now, so that, when these things all land on a civil servant's desk, actually we've made it easy for them, and we've regained as much control and as much power over the future for the benefit of our residents as we can.
Quick final thoughts, Tom.
I think the question here isn't whether change is needed, it's the kind of devolution that we want, and who wants. So what's going to equip local authorities with the capacity, the autonomy to lead with their own voice, or are we going to look for something that's standardization and potentially at the expense of local difference and democratic choice? So that's the fundamental question here, I think.
Many thanks. Colin, your last bullet point.
Yeah, I suppose what I would hope for the future would be a pausing of this agenda while we do while the centre does some proper research and the alternatives that exist across the globe to the powers and responsibilities that local government could have. So look at the job properly rather than rushing this through. I think Bridget is right. Local government, local democracy is being hollowed out by this process. We are losing the ability of councillors to be able to really speak for their areas. Our councillors already have the highest representative ratios across Europe, and we have the fewest number of councillors across Europe. That is going to get worse. And finally, resourcing local authorities, absolutely right. I've just come back from a week in Greece. I checked into my hotel. The first thing I was asked for by the receptionist was not have a lovely time, here's the Wi-Fi code, I need your €60 municipal tax, please. Now, I paid that. I didn't rage against the machine. I didn't go and see the mayor and complain. I think we need to be a bit more imaginative.
Okay, very quick one, Marianne and Jack, then I'm going to call it a wrap.
Thank you very much indeed. Fantastic comments today, really useful. The point I was going to move towards is to make sure that we do have resources for local government. We've talked a lot about reorganisation, and I think the government is hoping that there'll be some savings that they'll be able to spend on the process of the reorganisation, because of course it costs money, but also to try and make savings for the long term in the future. But I'm not sure that our experience is that those savings are not realised, and that means that it could be quite a risk, and that local government does still need proper funding. This is not a way of avoiding the increasing costs that we face. Thank you.
Indeed, not. Great point, well made. Jack, final words to you.
Yeah, I would just make one brief reflection off the back of that. I think some savings will be realised, but the question is, does this achieve the explicit objective of putting councils on a path to sustainable financing? And that, I think, will be the abiding question. The final point is debt. We haven't talked about debt in councils, but that's a massive issue that's going to cloud some of this.
Indeed,
just to clarify, savings or cuts? That's the point. Thank you. Genuine savings, or will they just be reducing services, providing them in fewer places? Less service. Thanks.
Well, look, that's a wrap. That's all, folks. Sincere gratitude to our fantastic panel, our SS, Colin, Steve, Tom, Marianne, Jack and Bridget. Thank you for everyone participating in the webinar, for contributing to our exchange and dialogue, and for reading the essay if you can. We hope to see you all in Liverpool next week for the Local Government Association Conference 2025. You know where to find us, and we hope to see you at a future Localis event. Nanu, sign off for now. Take great care. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you.